friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and I have an exciting video for you guys today, one that I know many of you are anticipating, my top 10 reads of 2025. So the best books that I read last year. And I don't even think I need more preamble than that, other than I have ranked these in order for you guys. So let's go ahead and dive in with number 10, which is Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce. This is the first book in a duology. I forget what the name of the duology is, but in any event, this is a young adult romance that involves some nerdy elements, seeing as it surrounds a D&D game. Our protagonist here ends up as kind of like a punishment working at her dad's game shop, even though she's not really in that scene. And through some circumstances, which I'll let you discover for yourself if you want to read this, she ends up fake dating her coworker at the store and also being sucked into a D&D group. So beyond the fact that this included D&D and I just had a lot of fun kind of adventurous elements to it, I really appreciated the main character in here, how she was reactive, how we got to see her in kind of different social scenes, different situations, and just like different facets of her personality because of that. I had previously kind of given up on young adult contemporary romance because I never seemed to love it, but I decided to give this one a go anyway because of the nerdy elements it involved, and I'm really glad that I did because I had a great time with this, and this definitely had me questioning that decision. So I definitely recommend this one if this sounds like it's up your alley, and of course the reactive main character is the biggest standout element for me in this. Coming in at the number 9 spot, we have a book I read in December, and that was Holiday Romance by Catherine Welsh. This was a bit of a surprise to me because I had this on my self-destruct list thinking like, oh, it's going to be cheesy. I'm not going to really love it. Most Christmas romances like aren't really my cup of tea, but I picked it up and read it, and lo and behold, ended up having a great time with this. So this didn't have as much cheesiness as I perceived it to, and the characters definitely deal with some real life situations and some tough things, and it doesn't just solely focus on the romance. There is more involved with their personal lives and their families situations and stuff too. And in here we follow Molly and Andrew, who are two Irish expats living in Chicago, and they have been there for years, and every year at Christmas time they book the same flight home to see their families at Christmas. And so they have known each other as acquaintances and kind of just traveled together for, I think, 10 years at this point. But in this one, there's a storm. So I think their flight is either canceled or delayed. I can't remember. So this is kind of like their journey to try and get home for the holidays and their romance in the process of doing so. So this does involve one of my favorite romance tropes that I cannot tell you about because it would be spoilery for this book, but it also involves the grumpy sunshine dynamic, which is fun. Our love interest here is really big on Christmas and our main character is not so much. So that was just kind of a fun thing for a seasonal read. I actually ended up enjoying this one so much that I immediately looked into the sequels, figured out that there was a short story following these characters set after this book ends, and you could get it for free if you sign up for the author's newsletter. So I went ahead and did that and binged that as well and really liked that one. And I've put the sequel to this on my wish list for next Christmas too. Coming in at the number 8 spot, if you don't know this about me, I love a nuanced villain. A character that just gets under your skin and gives you a visceral reaction. And boy, did the main character of this book hit that for me. I'm of course talking about The Good Samaritan by John Mars. So in here you follow a woman who works at a suicide hotline, but her motivations for doing so are not altruistic. She enjoys hearing people spiral while they're on the phone with her. She looks for scenarios and looks for people where she can kind of build this relationship and watch them spiral further and kind of like go against what she should be doing for her job. So needless to say, you absolutely do not root for this main character. And she is, whew, she gives you that kind of a reaction. But this read was so tense and pulse pounding and just had me invested because of how I felt. The other thing that really surprised me about this one is that it doesn't follow John Mars' typical storytelling format or style. So with a lot of his thrillers, he tends to do like 4 or 5 POVs and rotate between them and sort of like tell the story in like more of a mosaic type of building up style. In this one, you follow just our main character for the first third, somebody else for the second third, and then both of them interchangeably in the last third. It did make a lot of sense after reading the story why he chose to structure it that way, and I'm really glad that he did. But I think it was also kind of like fresh and interesting for me because of that as well, especially with how many John Mars books I read last year. But I absolutely loved getting to investigate sort of this character's backstory and why they were the way that they were, what happened to them to have them making the choices that they're making, and what is going on with her, or what went on with her. So definitely I felt like John Mars was very intentional in how he wrote this one, and definitely I appreciated all the nuance that went into our villain. So if this sounds like something that you would enjoy, I would definitely recommend. I will also say the audio for this was really good. I enjoyed all the sound effects and the production that this entailed with the Helpline. Coming in at the number 7 spot, we have Mirror Sight by Kristen Britton. So this is actually my third favorite Green Rider book, but the other two that rank a little bit higher were rereads for me, so they don't make the list because they're rereads. And I obviously can't tell you too much about what's happening in this book, given that it is book 5 in a series. But in book 1, you open with following Kerrigan, who is expelled from her school at Celium. And on her way home, she runs into a messenger of the king, a Green Rider, pierced by 2 black arrows, and he is begging her on his deathbed to take up his mission and deliver an important message to the king. She accepts and is pursued by his murderer, and it is a wild adventure, a wild ride, if you will. And obviously, once the message is delivered, the story expands a lot in scope and changes from there. At the end of book 4, there's something big that happens to kind of like change things up and shake things up. And I'm not going to tell you more than that. I'm definitely not going to spoil you. But it meant that I had a lot of questions at the start of this. It took me a hot minute to get oriented in this one and to just figure out where we were, what was happening, what's going on. But once I did, I got really invested in this for sure. Even though it kind of felt like a tangent or a side mission away from like the overarching plot, I definitely enjoyed some of the character moments in here and just sort of the adventurous nature of our main character in here. I love that even though this took a step away from the main overarching plot in a lot of ways, we still got a lot of things set up towards that. We now have a lot more things to have questions about, and definitely this piqued my interest throughout, and I loved the pacing once I got oriented in it. I definitely need to prioritize catching up on this series in 2026. I meant to in 2025, but it didn't quite happen. But I'm at least happy to say that this one makes my top 10. Coming in the number 6 spot, we have Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. In here you follow Bug, or Beauregard, and he is a mechanic who has kind of straightened himself out and gotten himself out of the life. But the circumstances of his life are starting to crumble, and he's finding himself kind of getting sucked back into some nefarious, shady stuff in order to make ends meet and try and survive. And essentially, this follows the plot of a jewelry store heist from there. So true to S.A. Cosby's style, the plot expands a lot in scope from what you start with. And he also has a really amazing way of writing his stories that make you empathize and understand his characters. I love not only how he manages to do that, but also how he keeps things so gritty and how unique his books feel because of his prose and his tone. Further to that, this is also partially set in the city I live in, so there were some fun Easter eggs for me in terms of like street names and just like things that I recognized. There is actually a jewelry store right off the interstate on Jefferson Avenue here, although it is a chain one and not a one-off like the book says. So like some details are changed for sure. But there was definitely some extra joy in this one in discovering sort of all the little Easter eggs and tidbits for locals. S.A. Cosby lives, I think, about half hour or an hour away. So it definitely makes sense that he would choose to set his book kind of around our local hometown area. But definitely the character journey that he takes you on through his books and the action-packed endings he delivers are other elements that make his book stand out so much to me. Coming in at number 5, we have another book that has some special Easter eggs and ties to a location very close to my heart, my hometown. And this one is Moon of the Turning Leaves by Waubgeshig Rice. And he is actually a local author to my hometown. He grew up on a reserve about 15 minutes drive away from where I grew up. And this is the sequel to Moon of the Crusted Snow, which is a post-apocalyptic kind of futuristic story set on a remote northern indigenous reserve in northern Ontario. And it follows some kids away at college making their way home to the reserve after the world has gone to crap in some ways, and also just sort of how the reserve is surviving and thriving in this scenario. In the sequel, many years have passed and you're following the next generation, and you have a group of characters who are traveling south to kind of go back to their ancestral homelands, which are set in my hometown area, to kind of figure out what has happened to the world outside of that. So I loved that we got to explore sort of the post-apocalyptic stuff outside of just what was happening on the reserve like we did in book 1. But more than that, I really appreciated the main character of this one, Nengong, and I loved how Wapgishig Rice was able to infuse Anishinaabe culture in with post-apocalyptic story. That definitely had me on the edge of my seat and invested as I was reading. And I also loved that once we got sort of towards our hometown area, there were moments where I was able to pick out exactly the place that he was describing in the book. So there were definitely some fun, kind of noticeable Easter eggs for locals to my hometown. I will also say I also loved the audio narrator for this one. I thought his intonation with everything was excellent, and it definitely felt like he brought this story to life. Also, I will say if you're somebody who has read book 1 but it has been a while, don't feel like you need to reread in order to jump into this one, because he does an excellent job of seamlessly recapping the main events of that one into the beginning chunks of this story. And because there's been such a time jump, things look vastly different anyways. Coming in the number 4 spot, we have a book that I read for Thrill, Chill, or Kill, which I'm very happy to be saying, because a lot of the Thrill, Chill, or Kill books we've had over the last couple years have not always been my favorites. So I'm really glad that I can finally say I have one that is. And this one is The Quiet Tenant by Clémence Michelin. And in here you're following 3 women whose lives kind of revolve around a serial killer. And some of them know he's a serial killer, others do not. You're following his daughter, his captive, and a woman who is crushing on him as he's a widower. And essentially this one opens with a big change in the life circumstances of our serial killer, because he and his family lived on his in-laws' property, and now that their daughter has passed away, they would like him to move. The only problem is his captive is living in the shed, locked up, and now he's going to be moving her into the apartment with his daughters. So obviously you can tell from that synopsis and that premise that there's going to be a lot of tension, a lot of close calls, a lot of nail-biting moments in this one, and that definitely held true. My investment was very high reading this one. But more than that, I loved how the author played around with the themes of like every woman is a little bit part of another woman, and that we have a lot of shared experiences even though we can have vastly different perspectives. It was definitely really interesting to kind of explore how the different women in his life felt about him, what they knew about him, what perceptions they had about him, and sort of how they responded to different things about him. I also really appreciated that she was intentional with giving us character motivations for decisions and character backstory moments in here as well. But I think really at the heart of it, it's the character reactions and character perceptions and just the pulse pounding, nail biting, tension filled moments that really made this a favorite for me. Moving on to my number 3 spot, we have another contemporary romance, one that really took me by surprise, and that is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. So I have found that I've been really enjoying contemporary romance by Canadian authors as of late, and I think it's just like a little piece of home away from home, and this one definitely had that. This author is from an area that's about 3 hours drive from my hometown. But in here you follow our main character, Wynn, and this opens with her at her best friend's Halloween party, and she has a hookup and gets accidentally pregnant. And this is the romance that ensues from there. So don't let the accidental pregnancy trope scare you away from this one, because I also typically hate that trope, but I did enjoy how it was handled in this book. So I will say that this one is not very realistic in terms of how it's told. It's more of like a wish fulfillment feel-good type of read. But the standout element to me was the character banter. Oh my goodness, did this have me laughing out loud at several moments. I was doing yard work outside with Jake while I was listening to the beginning of this, and he kept looking over at me like, are you okay? Because I would just randomly burst out laughing. And I would have to like tell him kind of like the joke or like the character moment that had me just losing it. I also really appreciated that this one didn't have a third act conflict, which I thought it was kind of refreshing for a contemporary romance. I thought it was going to. I thought I knew what it would be, and then it just didn't happen. But we did get to really explore a lot of the character depth and the character backstory in this one. And I also just really appreciated that this was an own voices story and that the author had some subtle social commentary involved because she had such a close personal experience to this character. So yeah, for all of those reasons, definitely recommend, but the character banter, top notch for sure. Moving into what you would more expect with the typical tone of my favorite reads, my number 2 spot goes to Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. So I don't think this was a shocker to anybody who knew my reading taste. I mean, Sword of Kaigen has been a favorite for me, so much so that Jake gifted me the special edition. But I'm happy to say that this one lived up to my experience with Sword of Kaigen, and I absolutely loved this as well. So in here you follow 2 characters, Tomas, who is a refugee in the city of Tiran, and Siona, who is going out to be the first female high mage in this city. Through a set of circumstances, the 2 of them end up working together. And what they learn through each other and through watching each other's experiences really kind of changes and develops how they perceive everything that's been happening and kind of shakes up what they thought they knew. This had a lot of really amazing social commentary, and the way I kind of explain it was like, this is everything that I wanted Babel by R.F. Kuang to be. So this is also sort of like a dark academia situation with a lot of social commentary. And while the core of it is really the characters and the character experiences, there was so much else to love about this one. The plotting was superb. I loved the pacing. I love that you had like a whoa shocker at the beginning, then a slow build to more, and then like crazy reveals that just kept coming, and then action sequences, and it just got wild by the end. I love that M.L. Wong definitely rips my heart out, stomps on it, but in the best way possible. I love that she's not afraid to shy away from some of the most like raw, dark, emotional stuff. Some of the quotes in here definitely had me having chills. And that's not an experience that I have very often. Like, I'm really not much of a quote girly. There's probably like 3 or 4 quotes that stand out to me in like all the books I've read ever. And that's probably close to 1,000 books. So it really takes something special to stand out in my brain the way that this one did, and I highly recommend this. I feel like M.L. Wong is great for all types of fantasy readers because she has an amazing balance between plot work and character work. She tends to have her books have more of a medium pacing, and there's just something really approachable yet interesting about her writing as well. While I did think this was objectively a better structured and better planned book than Sword of Kaigen, I will say I still think Sword of Kaigen packs the slightly more emotional punch for me, but this definitely is an all-time favorite now too. Then coming in at my number 1 book for the year, you can probably all guess if you've been following my channel for a while, because I read this back in January. I raved about it then. I've raved about it in my top 10 books of the year so far that I did mid-year, and I probably haven't really shut up about it since. And that, of course, is Malice by John Gwynne, the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And this is a Viking-inspired epic fantasy where you really open with some kind of omens of a prophecy sort of starting. So you have giant worms awakening and showing up. You have stones weeping blood. And it's very obvious that something big is coming and things are about to be shaken up. So I definitely enjoyed how the story was woven together through so many different character perspectives in so many different places of the world. I will say this had like a steep learning curve to the beginning. I had to take so many detailed notes to just kind of wrap my mind around who is who. Like, there's so much thrown at the reader in the first like 20-25 chapters in this one. I had pages and pages and pages of notes, but it definitely paid off because I had a zillion theories. I was like the crazy conspiracy lady reading this one. And that is why I enjoyed this one so much and why it was such a memorable reading experience for me. I had the best time trying to figure out all the pieces of this prophecy, how they could potentially fit different characters, how certain things might happen, that certain characters might actually be lying and that this was actually true of them, where certain magical artifacts might be hidden. Just, there was so much that I was guessing at and had thoughts on that it was wild. And I felt like I had a really awesome balance of getting some answers on this one, but also having so much more to keep wondering about. I definitely feel like John Gwynne has the potential to become an all-time favorite author for me. And this is definitely, I think, going to be an all-time favorite series once I keep going with it. I really, really hope that he doesn't leave us with a lot of loose ends and we do eventually get answers to things. But based on my experience just with this one so far, I do think that he's going to deliver on those things because he was definitely delivering on some things already in this installment. If you don't know this about me, I am a plot reader to my core. I can love a character. I especially love a reactive character. But the thing that's going to make a book really, really stick out to me and become an all-time memorable favorite is a nuanced plot. And this delivered on that for sure. I did still connect to a couple of the characters in here, especially Castell and Veritas. And beyond that, I also really liked John Gwynn's prose and his tone, and that he just wasn't afraid to hurt his readers. Like, I had an emotional roller coaster experience reading this one. There were moments I was crying, there were moments I was cheering, there were moments I was angry, there were moments that I was thrilled. This is definitely one that I can foresee myself rereading years later, and I feel like now that I know some things from the ending of this one, it already is kind of like changing my perception of how things are introduced and like wanting to have a reread someday. So next time you are in the mood for a big epic and you're ready to have a big brain book that you nitpick every detail in to try and have theories and you want a nuanced plot, look no further than Malice. So that was it for my 10 best books of 2025. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite books of last year were. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye.